Ask your neighbors what the biggest problem facing California is today, and most will say the drought. However, prior to the drought, water was already a concern for a thirsty California. Where it comes from, who owns it, what it's used for has been a contentious issue for generations. The largest water agency in California, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, delivers over 1.7 billion gallons of water per day to over 300 cities in Southern California. The opinions of the district are as varied as the communities it serves. Joining us to talk water from a Southern California perspective is MWD General Manager Jeff Kightlinger.
At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Jeff, given the drought that we've been facing over the past several years, what's the current state of our capability as California to meet the demands of our citizens?
This drought's like no drought I've ever seen before. We plan for droughts in the water business. Droughts are part of our thinking, our mental planning and preparation, and we do everything to prepare for droughts, but this one's off the charts. 7 of the last 8 years have been drought in California, and the last 4, they've looked at tree rings, and they estimate this is the worst drought in California in over 1,200 years.
1,200 years.
Yeah, we're way off recorded history time. We're into truly uncharted territory for California. So in some aspects, we've done quite well. I mean, when you look around, you basically see the California economy growing, unemployment going down, a lot of good numbers for California while coping with this record-shattering drought. It really speaks well to the resiliency of California and a lot of the planning we've done.
But aren't we living on borrowed time? We hear things like we're draining the underground aquifers across the state, that people are actually going dry in terms of being able to transfer water back and forth to places that need them in agriculture and even some urban areas in the state. So we're sort of spending down the piggy bank. If we don't get a correction with regards to the climate, what's next?
Well, you point out very well that we have used a lot of the tricks of the trade. You know, we have water in storage, water in reservoirs. We've been pulling down our groundwater. We've been doing transfers and exchanges, and we're kind of out of those tools. And we've asked the last year for people just to simply cut back, and people really responded, so they have cut back. But we are running out of those tools, and there isn't much left. And so what we're reaching, if this goes on for another year or a year after that, if this becomes Australia-like, where they had a 12-year drought, if this becomes similar to that, we'll be like Australia in terms of having to take rather drastic measures.
Now, MWD is the largest water agency in the world.
You know, I've looked around, yes, probably so.
Yes. Give us a sense of scale in terms of your geography and how many people you serve.
So Metropolitan Water District covers 6 counties in Southern California. We start with Ventura County, Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego counties. That's about 5,200 square miles, which is a relatively small piece of the overall state of California, about a 1/15 of the state. But there's 19 million people crammed in there. California is 38 million. We're serving water to 1 in every 2 Californians.
1 out of every 2 Californians.
Exactly.
So obviously you guys have to have a big straw in order to serve all those people.
Right.
And just to be completely candid with you, typically in Northern California when we have conversations about water and water supply, you all aren't in the rooms, at least the rooms that we're in. They're pretty homogenous.
Yeah.
And you all are looked at as sort of, the 800-pound gorilla on the street.
Right.
Now, again, just being straight with you, how do you respond to the charge that MWD essentially is taking all of Northern California's water to a bunch of Southern Californians who frankly haven't planned their communities well enough to take care of their own needs.
I hear a lot of that in Northern California, and
we're going to give it to you, bark off.
Yes,
Okay?
it's an interesting conversation. I did all my schooling in Northern California, and I was always very startled to hear this sort of
Berkeley and Santa Clara, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I was very startled when I came up here to get this attitude about people taking our water. To be fair, I was one of those Southern Californians at the time that had no idea where our water came from, and it always intrigued me. But we actually do move water from the Colorado River and from Northern California, and those are our two basic imported water supplies. They supply a little more than half of all of Southern California's water. The other half is what we call local water, which is our local groundwater basins and our local rainfall. But Southern California, relatively arid Mediterranean climate, without water from Northern California and the Colorado River, you couldn't have 19 million people there. Some people say, well, then perhaps they shouldn't be there. California is a desirable place to live, work. We have a booming economy. We have the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world, and it's because we have been able to accommodate people and live in a place that is that has some challenges about water supply, but we do move that water around and we make it work and we share it as one state.
Water's an interesting issue in that it's a lot more emotionally charged than it might appear at first glance.
Right.
A good friend of mine recently told me, he said, you know what's interesting about water? When people think about natural gas being found in Montana, no one assumes that all of the natural gas in Montana has to stay in Montana. But when we talk about water, we feel very local and proprietary over it. What do you think drives that?
It's an amazing psychological thing. People live in cities. Every city imports its needs. There isn't natural gas in the city to heat it. There isn't enough generation of electricity to light it up. Your garbage and refuse gets moved out. Your sewerage has to be moved out. All water is brought in. San Francisco imports all its water. And yet, there is something emotional about water. No one thinks twice about moving electricity all around the country or natural gas or gasoline for cars. Everyone talks about and debates, is it really appropriate, is it moral to move water in the same way we move all those other commodities that are necessary to live? What drives that? I'm not sure. I think water is so essential to life. I think that's what drives that emotional aspect of it.
So let's talk about the big project that is at sort of on the table right now, which is the tunnel project.
Right.
Okay. MWD is a supporter of the tunnel project, correct?
Well, our board hasn't taken a final position. We are supporting fixing the delta. And right now, the preferred project that seems to be moving forward is the tunnel project. It hasn't reached a final conclusion. And our board has reserved its judgment to take a final look at what's it going to cost and what are the bills going to be to us to do that. So,
well, let's talk about that for a second, because this project, for many, doesn't make any sense.
Right.
When it was first conceived, it was a $3 or $4 billion project that was going to deliver, I think it was estimated like 1.5 million additional acre feet of water down to Southern California. Today, Jeff Michael from University Pacific said in a press conference that this project is really going to cost, hard cost, about $17 billion. And if you count the debt service on the bonds and the operations, you're upwards of $50–60 billion before it's all done. And it's really not going to deliver, at least as it is judged right now, more than a paltry amount of new acre feet of water. In fact, the ratio is supposedly 150,000 acre feet per $1 billion spent. So I'm trying to figure out why Governor Brown is so adamant in supporting this thing.
Yeah, I think people sometimes look at water projects and get shook up by the numbers. When Metropolitan built the Colorado River Aqueduct, Southern California in the middle of the Great Depression agreed to go build this project that was at its time the most expensive water project ever, and it was 17% of the entire assessed valuation of Southern California in a single project. And voters overwhelmingly said in 1933, let's do this. We need it. Water's essential if we're going to live here in Southern California. 1960, Governor Pat Brown talks to Metropolitan and says, I want you to fund half for the next 75 years, the most expensive water project ever built, the state water project. Very controversial. Pat Brown barnstormed the state, passed by a whisker, but it was built, and we still pay that bill. Metropolitan pays about $500 million every year to pay for the cost of the state water project that we agreed to in 1960, and our obligation runs to 2035, a 75-year commitment. This project is like that. It's a multi-generational project. It's not about more water, it's about how best to ensure reliability and modernize our system.
Stop there for a sec, okay? I have been under the impression it's always about more water. So give us a little bit of depth on this. It's not about more water. Because if it really is 17 hard costs but 50, 60 billion overall, it's hard for me to rationalize as a taxpayer paying that much money over the time span you described on the state water project just to make things more efficient. Sell me on the benefits of why that makes sense.
So right now, Metropolitan gets about 4% of the total water coming off the Sierra Nevadas. It seems like a relatively small number, but that accounts for almost a third of all the water used in Southern California. So for us, it's a very important supply. Coming off the Sierras, it's a relatively small piece of it. But reliability is what we're all about in the water business. People expect water to be there 24/7, 365. And we expect to be able to do that. We do it during a drought, we do it during a wet year. Well, what you really can't afford are long-term interruptions of this water supply. Everyone knows we live in an earthquake-prone state. The challenges of climate change are going to make water more volatile. We see sea level rise pushing salts into the delta. These are real long-term challenges and that threaten water supply reliability. We don't want to be in a place where we're saying Monday, Wednesday, Friday are water days, Tuesday, Thursday, no showers. That's not where we want to be. We want to be reliable.
Do you think, though, and your board thinks that this is the best possible approach to solving the reliability issue?
Probably the best approach in the Delta is some sort of bypass where we separate the water for people and farming and agriculture from the ecosystem. Right now we've been using the Delta levee system, the marshes, the ecosystem as both a place for natural species and water delivery. And it creates constant conflict between the two. So there probably should be some sort of separation. Tunnels make a lot of sense in the modern world. We've really grown in our tunnel capability. We used to always think canal, some sort of canal. The old peripheral canal debate that took place in the 1980s was the approach because that was the best technology at the time. But in the 1930s, California proposed a delta bypass. We proposed it again in the 1960s, again in the 1980s. Duke Magian looked at a Duke ditch going through the delta. Separating the ecosystem water from the drinking water has been a goal for California for the last 80, 90 years. The newest iteration is maybe we should look at tunnels. Out of sight, out of mind, probably the safest seismically, expensive, not cheap, but real long-term benefits for the state.
Yesterday, Congressman Jerry McInerney held a press conference decrying the tunnel project. There are numerous groups out there that are against the tunnel project, taxpayer groups that are against the tunnel project, and the case that you make for water reliability, I understand it. The question is this, and this is the question that when I've spoken to these groups that they've posed to me, which is how, if we don't do anything, are we really going to be any worse off 10 years from now than we are right now?
We run a huge risk. 2 out of every 3 Californians get their water through the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. That includes Southern California, but it includes Silicon Valley, it includes the East Bay and the Bay Area, it includes big chunks of the Bay Area, Bakersfield, all this area up and down the state, Santa Barbara, the Central Coast. 4 to 5 million acres of farmland are irrigated from the projects that get their water from the Delta. So when we know it's seismically unsafe and we know we don't have a modern system, you know, we built these projects in the 1930s and 1960s, and we just say, well, let's just gamble and keep things the way they are. You're really doing a disservice to our children and our grandchildren. You know, it was our grandparents and our parents that built these systems. They paid for them. They built them that we enjoy them. And if we just allow them to deteriorate and don't modernize them and just sort of hope things work out, to my mind, we haven't done our duty as a generation.
Why is it that this issue is so contentious and seems to defy a consensus that allows real benchmarkable progress to take place? And I know we talked about emotion, but let's divorce that from the equation. What are the real issues that keep people from at least finding some sweet spot of consensus to move forward on?
It's been a challenge for every governor, and that's why most governors don't tackle it. It is the emotion, I assume. It's also, we live in the most diverse state and the most diverse country in the world, and so naturally we have this huge diversity of opinions. But we've always had this strong north-south divide in California. I honestly believe it's better than when I was a kid growing up, but it's still pretty much out there, and it does defy an easy answer, it does defy consensus. And I think we're going to have to simply go forward on a divided opinion. Sometimes you just have to do that. When we did the State Water Project, 1960, it passed basically 51-49 in a popular vote. It was tough then. The Peripheral Canal vote in 1982, it went down something like 90% of Northern Californians, once you got above Sacramento North, voted against it.
Some of that divisiveness also comes in interest, urban versus rural,
Yes.
that sort of thing. If your board has not taken a final stand on the tunnels project, correct?
Correct.
If they decline to support it, are the urban water districts willing to go it alone and leave agriculture to do their own thing?
I don't think so. I think this has to be a collective decision. I don't believe that the agricultural community can separate from the urban community and say, we'll take a different sort of reliability. This is about California. We now supply 80% of the world's fruits and vegetables and the rest of the country. I don't think we can afford as a state to simply sort of say, we're going to have very loose reliability for some parts of the region and high reliability for
But
others.
aren't there it sounds sort of like a mutual aid society, but aren't your interests very different?
They are. We have urban interests, which really calls for high degrees of water quality. That's something that's very important for us for health and human reasons. We also want a very high degree of reliability. The agricultural areas are not as concerned with water quality, and they need water more for certain times a year than they do year out. So there are differences, but generally we've been able to find partnerships. Metropolitan has terrific partnerships with agricultural districts where we can kind of say, we'll take the water in those winter months and store it for our summer months, and we can back off sometimes in the summer months when you really need it for your crops.
Right, those partnerships are something that's of interest. Now, there's been rumblings that you all are in the process of buying 4 islands in the Delta, which just by happenstance seem to be right in the path of where the tunnels are going to go. Is that a project you're going to move forward on? And if you did, what would you use it for?
There's these 4 islands in the Delta area that are called the Delta Wetlands Projects that proponents of this project have talked about turning, I believe, 2 of the islands into reservoirs and use 2 of them for some sort of habitat reasons. They've approached us about investing in the project. We're taking
This is Zurich Insurance that's the owner of these?
They're the ultimate owner, and they have an operating group out here in California. And this has been around since the 1980s. People have been exploring it. They've approached us about potentially being a partner or finding some way to work with them on it.
What would that do for you all if you were to acquire it?
We're taking a hard look at it. We have to think about it. We're not exactly sure what it would all do for us. There is a water storage project. There's potential uses of the land right now to help rebuild those islands and use them for habitat. Big issues on habitat in the Delta, and we've been trying to find good habitat land for helping species. And then finally, if tunnels are ever built, they could be used as staging grounds.
Now, the tunnels, though, according to some, the tunnels will further degrade the natural habitats that we're trying to preserve, and that the possible extinction of a number of species like the Delta smelt becomes an inevitability if the tunnels are put in place. In fact, there are some who say that we couldn't get the sign-offs from under the Clean Water Act or under the Endangered Species Act in order to build the tunnels as they're currently conceived. Where are you guys at on that issue?
And that's frustrating because the reality is the other way around.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, do share them.
Yeah, it's the status quo where we're trying to, the water wants to move east to west in the Delta, flowing from the rivers from the Sierras out to the Golden Gate Bridge, and then the tide occasionally pushing back. That's the natural ebb and flow that the natural native species are comfortable with. Instead, on the eastern side of the Delta, we're trying to shove water north to south and keep that a freshwater channel while keeping the rest of it natural. It's our use of the Delta as a water delivery system that has put the native species in jeopardy. The more we continue the status quo, the more likely we'll see extinctions and nonstop battles.
So what's in it for them? For the people who are promoting the status quo, what's in it for them?
Well, there's a number of, I think, agendas at play. But the bottom line is building the tunnels is probably the best thing you could do for the Delta habitat environment, or simply stop exporting water altogether. I think a lot of these people are saying, we want to stop exporting water. Well, I appreciate sort of a view of trying to go back to a 1950s California, back when we were 12 million people as a state. The idea that we're simply going to turn off the water supply to 25 million Californians is just not going to happen. We can't return to the 1950s. The status quo is not tenable. We have to do something new.
When it comes to storage, one of the projects under consideration is called the Sites Reservoir Project.
Yes.
Does MWD support more storage projects of that sort?
Yes.
And are you guys involved in that project?
We're just looking at it and studying it. We are not a partner in it, but I think we could be. I believe it's got a lot of value, and it's something that I would take to my board and say, we should look at what are the benefits in here. Metropolitan believes in storage. We've built a lot of it, but for our storage, we'd have been out of water in Southern California during this drought. We built a $2 billion reservoir in 2000 called Diamond Valley Lake. And it's been our insurance policy. It's basically saved us during this drought.
Incidentally, I want to come back to the north-south split. While that does exist, in some cases, you all seem to have a south-south split. There seems, what is the contentiousness between MWD and San Diego?
Yes, people think of Southern California as sort of one entity and Northern California as another, but we're divided also internally within ourselves. We have a lot of that's also emotional. The San Diego region has often felt that Los Angeles has pushed it around and bullied it around, and basically if you go to a Padres game, it's just as vigorous as at a Giants game. You'll hear the chant, beat LA, if the Dodgers are in town. So LA has always perceived as sort of a big juggernaut around the state, even to its southern neighbor, San Diego. So San Diego, when Metropolitan was expanding in the 1940s, and we had to supply water supply to San Diego as a critical naval base, San Diego wanted to build its own Colorado River aqueduct like its neighbor up north, Los Angeles. And the Department of Defense got tired of waiting for San Diego to pull the trigger on an expensive project and finally said, the Navy's just going to annex San Diego to Metropolitan Water District, and Metropolitan, you're going to deliver water. And many say, ever since then, it's sort of created a shotgun marriage.
It's nice to know that political infighting and intrigue is not just reserved for Northern California.
Right. We have our share.
But I want to turn to something that I know that you've been a champion of and that MWD has been a champion of. An amazing statistic is that while the population has grown by whatever percentage you want to choose for the year that you anchor to, that consumption has stayed about the same because of conservation measures. What is it that you all are doing that allows your population to grow, but for water consumption to remain fairly stagnant?
There was a big drought in California, late 1980s to 1991, and it drove home a lesson. It was the first time in Metropolitan's history we actually had to ration water. During the 1977 drought, that was a terrible drought, Metropolitan actually lent water to Marin County in Northern California because we had our good Colorado River supplies. So the wake-up call from the 1990 drought was, we're not going to get more water from Northern California from the Colorado River.
So what are the three things that you would say that have been most important in moving the needle in our final moments?
So what we did was we had to cut, we knew we had to live within our means, which meant we had to lower demands as we continue to grow. We went from 14 million to 19 million people from 1990 to the present, and we use less water today than we used in 1990. Most of that water efficiency in the household, the low flow shower heads, the toilets, et cetera, all that have been changed out. But we also now recycle 400,000 acre feet of water every year in Southern California that we didn't do any. So we've been growing local supply and pushing down demand.
Would those solutions work up here as well, you think?
Absolutely. They work everywhere. And you've seen them. You've seen them in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has aggressively adopted some of the standards. And you're really seeing Sacramento accelerate its metering. They're putting in 100 meters a day in Sacramento, spending $250 million on metering.
But we have a way to go, and we're going to leave it there.
Thank you.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guest, and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.